you're on the Deke board of directors. What's your thought now about the relevance of fraternities in today's world? You know, with all the changes that have happened.
Well, despite what we're going through and what we see, I mean, I have to fall back on what it meant to me, and it's so special. I think for certain individuals, it's not for everybody, as we know, but I think in terms of just the whole process of socialization process in college and everything that you go through, and having this cadre of people that are close friends. I think some of the things that we espouse today are really important. I mean, I think the fraternity has moved on a lot. Obviously, the stuff that you deal with and what how you've had to change, and that is meaningful. I mean, we went through some of that when I was in the '60s, but you know, a lot of it was real window dressing at best. But you know, in terms of community involvement and things like that.
Yeah.
But you know, when it comes back down to it, it's being with a bunch of people that you don't like them all, but boy, there's a bunch of them that are just special, and that meant so much to me in college. Otherwise, I've been sitting in the dorm. You know, I played a little bit. I played baseball, but I've been sitting in the dorm, and I went to concerts. I went to the Apollo. I went to the mosque in Newark.
Right.
I went to the Uptown in Philly, and I went to a place in Trenton to see. All I saw were rhythm and blues. I mean, I saw, even in Mobile, my mother started letting me go to R&B shows when I was 12, and I was by myself. And so that whole, and I would drag people to these shows, and they still occasionally come and say, I can't believe you took me to see so-and-so. I said, yeah, and then particularly, and it's serious, you go to Newark or someplace like that, this is before Martin was killed. After Martin Luther was killed, you couldn't do this anymore. It became too dangerous. But you could go up there, as long as you're respectful and you're the quiet white guy, nobody's going to bother you. But you know, it was, I usually have the guy, one of the fraternity brothers, I say, here's the money, go get the tickets. And they'd run up there, and then he'd suddenly realize, I'm in a whole different world that I thought I was in. You know?
That's part of the initiation.
Yeah, almost, yeah. So I think, I love to think it's still relevant. I mean, one of the aggravating things that I told you is that there are 10 of us that are very close. We've been doing things multiple times a year for 50 years now. And I can't get any of them, they all agree about how much it meant to them, but I can't get any of them to really do anything. And it's just, maybe it meant more to me than it should have, but it did. So I still feel like there's a great place for it. And I hate to say it, I wonder how much longer it can last. You know, it's up against a lot of issues, as we both know.
It does. But there are a lot of I think the human desire for connection is everlasting. So I think it'll figure out a way to still survive. I think, even though with all these pressures from the outside. But you know, John Reed probably doesn't ring a bell to you because he was 2 years younger than me, so probably wouldn't. But I'm going to his 40th wedding anniversary in a couple weeks in Atlanta. You know, so these friendships last forever and ever and ever. So we've probably got a group of, you say 10, maybe 15 in my case. You know, the guys that are just.
I think your class was different than our class like that. Like I could tell even when I was there, like there were a group of you guys and you were all really pretty close. Like I lived with some 1 year in a dormitory together, or we would go out for meals a lot together. And you were that there was more of that in your class than there was in my class, and I think even in the class in front of us. I could say afterwards, but you guys were sort of unique. So I could see where some of you would continue on with it more so than they did in our class. We had fun. I loved it. I'm with you. I had a great experience, and it was fantastic for me. And you know, I hope that they rise up to the challenge and figure out how to operate it.
Did you enjoy that year you lived in the house?
Oh, yeah. It was. I'm pretty disciplined, but I probably extended my discipline to its limit by not having to go to class. And it was hard to. It probably would have been better to have to go to the class for a few hours and come back to the house than just to sort of be at the house all day or do the independent project. But no, honestly, it was great. I loved it, and it was the one thing about living in the house because people didn't, they were always coming and going and interacting. So you got to. It really was sort of a great way to even get to know everybody else better, and then you got to know the younger classes a little bit better.
And then the meals twice a day. Lunch and dinner every single day. I'm sure you guys had meal plans.
Well, you probably don't know this story, but before I got there in '64, we hired a woman who was, I think she was Dutch, and she was Jewish. And I tell you that because she was an Anne Frank kind of story.
Mm.
Her fiance had been killed by the Germans before the war started, right about the time the war started, and her father escaped, but they were hidden somewhere in Amsterdam or someplace for a while because they were Jewish before they got to New York. When they got to New York, he was a baker, and we hired her as a cook.
Mm.
Then she became our house mother, and she was our house mother for 20 or 30 years. And she cooked for us at night. She would come down and cook after our regular cook was gone. So we had those, you know, we had 3 meals a day.
Hmm.
Wow.
You know, we had breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and I won't promise you all of them were good. Whew. But, you know, hey, but yeah, the meal plan, well, it's better because the food in cafeterias, I mean, if you had to be on a meal plan, you didn't have to after your freshman year, but if you were on a meal plan, it was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we had her, and she had a telephone. That sounds silly, but
Wow.
and if you were in good graces with her, you could use her telephone.
Oh.
and you know, we had a pay phone, but that was a little harder to deal with
Yeah.
than her phone. And she, you know, then you would pay her when you got some money. You'd pay her if you had any long distance calls
Mm-hmm.
and that sort of thing. And she sewed, so she would sew for us.
Mm.
And we were obnoxious. I mean, we loved her, but we were still obnoxious. And so
Mm.
that was a center point in my time in the house, which was really important. Which, you know, I don't know when house mothers disappeared. Finally out of the existence, but you know, it was sort of classical for us.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, we had an old cook, Ann something or other. You remember Ann, of course, and you know, she used to tip a little bit in the back room there, and we'd find the empty bottles and you know, that sort of thing. And but she was. We always used to say during rush, "Oh, we had the best cook on campus." Not sure that was always true, but the mealtime was special for us, and I'm sorry that most fraternity chapters don't do it anymore. They just don't, too much of a hassle or whatever.
Well, we even had, what would happen was, and we had a cook, and we had a guy, valet, that took care of the house a couple times a week too.
Mm-hmm.
But what was great, because everybody was an athlete, what they would do is, if it was your season, they would put your meal in the oven. It'd be there when you got there. And it was interesting that the other brothers respected that as opposed to eating it.
Yeah.
that's what usually would happen with that sort of stuff,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
And I don't know if you know the story about the guy that designed the house was a Deke, and he lived to be like 102 or 103.
Oh.
He used to come back to our alumni dinner, and he was one of those guys, unlike our generation for the most part. He would we'd always have at the dinners, and he would stand up. We'd ask him to recite something. He would recite the Iliad or something. We'd all be
learned. He was learned.
No, we'd be sitting there going, oh, and he'd go on and on. But it was done with this bravado that you just go, wow, you know. And his son was in his 70s, was coming back with him, you know. But the house was actually going to be, I was told, a lot bigger. But right as they were finishing it up was when the Depression hit in 28 and 29, and they were lucky enough to sort of close it up and finish it up and everything.
Yeah, one of the pictures Jack just sent me was the christening the chapter room in 1929.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
It's a cool picture. We're going to run in the Friday report, but yeah, that was, you know, just a few years ago, 5-6 years ago, I was visiting our MIT chapter, and they've got a big old house in Boston, and so they had everybody was there for dinner in jackets and ties. I guess I was the guest of honor or whatever. So they said, well, here, you know, you're going to sit up here. So all the tables are this way, and at the front there's a head table, and they asked me to go stand, you know, so everybody's standing behind their chair, and so I do the same thing, and then the president leans over and says, "I think they're waiting for you to sit down."
Okay.
So I sat down, and then the whole thing sits down like this, and it was really very well. And then a couple of times during the dinner, some of the guys had dates and so forth, and like once or twice somebody would yell out, "Woman rising," because if you had to get up and go to the washroom, every man in the place stood up, and she went. Of course, she was embarrassed, so she walked out. But still, you know, that some of that stuff is still around some places, and it's very nice to see.
We had jacket and ties. I was there. 5-year program. I was there all 5 years. It was always jacket and tie, unless somebody announced it was informal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it was some pretty awful outfits. You know,
Yeah.
and pretty wonderful outfits too. But they were jackets
Right.
and ties. You know.
But one thing I was curious about too, back to the music industry, is any funny stories that you can tell about any of the bands or acts that were like at the induction ceremonies or something like that, or any like funny things you want to tell us about the artists that you've known? Because I'm sure you've met some.
Well, I'm sure he's got. It's just a question of what can you remember.
Yeah.
I think probably one of the most memorable moments was when Prince was inducted, and I say this only because people would. We did a Time Life deal that got the CDs out, the DVDs out with all the inductions, and made a lot of money for the museum, which was great. But we always got requests for Prince's induction, but it wasn't his part. It was he played that night to honor John Lennon, not John Lennon, but George Harrison, and it was Petty and Jeff Lynne and George's son, and they're all up there, and down at the end was Prince, which was interesting to see all these sort of rockers over here, and you got Prince over here, and he comes out dressed in this red suit and red hat, and I think he had a red guitar, and just it was so, people don't think of Prince as a guitar player. He was a great musician, and he could play, and people just didn't focus on that, and he played this, and they played When My Guitar Gently Weeps. And you could see, if you see the video, that you see all these other guys almost with their mouth open watching him do the solo, and then he, of course, in typical theatrical thing, among other things, he falls off the stage backwards, and the bodyguards catch him, push him back up, and then when he finishes the whole program, as he's getting ready to walk up the stage, he just takes the guitar and throws it over his head out in the audience. Of course, the bodyguard catches it. So and we had things like when the Police were inducted, Sting and what's his name, Copeland? Is it Copeland?
Miles Copeland.
They got along and they didn't get along, and they got in a fight before the show, and I found out that he'd broken a snare drum. I don't know if he hit Sting with it or what, but I had to get one of our curators who was in the audience. You gotta go get that snare drum. That sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, and there were there was so many things, and again in the world, he knows it. It's a small club, because down in the front where all the industry people are, there's one thing, and there's the rest of us jamokes who are sitting around who know just enough to be dangerous and just enough connections. But I remember that like when Neil Diamond was inducted and Paul Simon inducted him, he comes out and he says there's 6 words that describe why Neil Diamond hasn't been inducted. This goes back, who gets inducted? Neil Diamond had been eligible for 30 years, never even on the ballot. Right. Finally get him on the ballot, and that was the problem. We couldn't get him through the committee. And Paul Simon, there are 6 words that tell you why he was never inducted sooner. You don't bring me flowers anymore, because all people could remember were the Streisand stuff, the schmaltzy saloon stuff. He wasn't the rock star again.
Yeah.
Quick memories,
And a great songwriter.
Oh yeah, he wrote hits for other people, Monkeys and everybody else. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, every year there was something that could be repeated or couldn't be repeated, and well, the jams used to be unrehearsed, and then they started rehearsing them, and before they were unrehearsed, the year McCartney was inducted singularly, which was actually the first year I was here, was Springsteen, McCartney, and somebody else, Billy Joel, and so McCartney wasn't going to come. He was so upset. In fact, you ever see the video of that? His daughter Stella, who has the fashion business, she has a T-shirt on that gets blanked out. The T-shirt says "About fucking time," because Lennon was inducted individually much earlier, and Paul, I won't get into all the stuff, but Paul thought he was going to be inducted sooner, and he never was, and he finally gets inducted, and he wasn't going to come. And then his daughter talked to him into coming, and he wasn't going to play, but then at the end of the night when the jam started, Billy Joel got up, of all things, and Paul was sitting in the audience down front, and Billy started playing Hey Jude. And Paul went up and started that, and that was those magical moments which aren't rehearsed, which you never are going to see anywhere else.
That's great.
Like that. So you just if you're a music guy, you just thank the gods that you saw
you were there.
1 or 2 of these things. You're never going to see them all. You see 1 or 2.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you remember, next to the Deke house was the Carmichael Towers. So it was 4 big towers. I think they're tearing them down now, right?
Yeah.
So to know the Dean Potter story, nobody would run for the president of the Towers. So my junior year, I was president of the Towers.
Oh.
I was the only one that said they would run. And then somebody at the last minute decided to run, and I still got elected. So I was president of the Towers. So I was living there the junior year, and Sunday night was laundry night. They had a laundry room, and across from the laundry room in the basement was a club not much bigger than this room right here. And somebody said, "Hey, you need to come over here. There's
Remember
a
the name of
meeting."
it?
No, I don't. Do you?
Is it The Good Woman?
Was that, no, I don't. No, I think that was the pub. This was, well, I don't remember. It was in the basement of the Towers.
Yeah.
And literally could seat 50 people.
Yeah.
And so somebody said, "Well, you know, you're doing your laundry." It's like, "You should come over. There's this really funny guy over here, a comedian." So we go over there, and it's Steve Martin. So Steve Martin is doing all his original material. King of Hearts, Come Out and Dance, The Disappearing Dime Trick, all this stuff. And it's like, we're all just like, what is going on here? And then he eventually wrote about this in his book, but he turned it into a shtick. And so the shtick was, he decided to Pied Piper us out of that room and across the street over to the Crystal. So the show's over, he's like, "Follow me!" So we all follow him. So there's us and Steve Martin, 30 guys. And we all end up at the Crystal across the street. The next thing you know, we're ordering crystals and food and whatever, and it's like, of course, time to pay. There is no Steve Martin. And you got college students Sunday night. We've spent all our money Saturday night.
Yeah.
Nobody had anybody to pay any of this, and they're all like, "Oh, it's for the food." And we're all like, whoom, scattered.
That's the 19-cent burger place.
Well, I was going to say, you know, they went bankrupt this year.
Did they?
And they filed for bankruptcy. Yeah,
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
it was, well, you guys, you're too old. It was 12 cents when I was
12 cents, yeah.
12 cents for a dollar. For a dollar.
Mhm.
Remember I told you, like, movies and comic books?
Yeah.
For a dollar. I used to ride the Greyhound bus from Daphne to Mobile. It was about 35, 40 miles. And I would go see 2 double features. And they started at $8.45, and they were 50 cents because I was 12 years old. And I'd see 2 double features in the morning. I'd go to the Crystal across the street and have 5 hamburgers, a Coke, and a piece of chocolate pie, and play the jukebox. That was $1.
Right.
And then I'd go see another double feature in the afternoon and ride the Greyhound bus back.
Wow.
And I bought my first stereo album by mistake, and I didn't know I'd been looking at this album for, of all things, the Dukes of Dixieland, which is silly, but I love the Dukes. And I didn't know it was in stereo, and I went and picked it out, and I took it up to the counter.
Right.
And I've been looking at this for weeks, and it was $3.98, right? And it was a lot of money. And people didn't buy albums because it was too much money.
Right.
And so I handed the guy, and he goes, "Okay, that'll be $5.98." But I'm so embarrassed. I paid for it. Now the problem is I didn't have enough money to get on the bus.
Oh.
My father had to come get me. He wasn't real pleased about that.
Yeah.
But the Crystal, Crystal is still, in fact, it upsets me. The one that I always go to a lot is the one in New Orleans, because in New Orleans you can go to it at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
It's right there at the
Yeah.
top of Bourbon Street and that sort of thing, and have it. But
So
that's
it's the porcelain room at the Crystal. We would dine at the porcelain room.
Yes. I assume they're still open around here, though. I know they're filed for bankruptcy, but I guess they're
Yeah,
still
they are.
open.
We also have a White Castle here now.
Oh,
Now, when
okay.
we were in college, it was big that they finally got a McDonald's in Nashville, but it was here in Green Hills, so it was literally
outside of-
8 miles away from the campus. But we would drive here Saturdays or Sundays and come to Green Hills and get a McDonald's.
Still
If it was
embarrasses
a Burger
me.
King, we could walk to, but not McDonald's.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Still embarrasses my wife that I buy, White Castle frozen ones.
Right.
I have them in the freezer because it's still, again, late at night.
Yeah.
Do cocktails. And it's really good.
I remember my dad, he was in town for an award ceremony, and my mom was with him, and I think 2 of my sisters, whatever, and it was a year always on my mind, won Song of the Year award. So we'd been to all the stuff, and it was time to go back to the hotel room. My dad's like, we gotta do something special. Let's drive through the Crystal. So it was drive through the Crystal there on West End by Vanity.
Sure,
was
yeah.
was how we celebrated always on my
Right,
mind being
right.
Song of the Year.
There you go. Did you have any funny stories or controversies? The Dixie Chicks were kind of controversial when you were running their business, weren't they? And you might have run into some.
Well, yeah,
Or was that later that they became sort of controversial?
no, I had was part of signing them to Sony when I was at Sony, and I'd worked with a manager, Simon Renshaw, and I'd worked with him on Clint Black and Colonel Bruce Hampton and the Aquarium Rescue Unit and a couple other projects. And I just said when I went to work for Sony, you just go find an act, like I love working with you, I'll sign an act that you find. And so he came to me with the idea of signing the Dixie Chicks, which was at the time somewhat humorous because they were a Western swing knockoff. They'd had 26 attempts to get record deals and never had any success at all. But Simon said, you know, he had this plan that he and the girls had developed, the Dixie Chicks, if you will, what they did. And it was like, that's great, then I'll sign that. And he was like, well, do you want to see it? I go, no, I don't want to see it. Like, I love that concept. Like, you go make it happen. That's your job.
Okay.
So we had a development deal we developed that was terrible. And like, that call was on Wednesday and Friday. They signed the development deal. And then Blake Chansey, who I still work with to this day, really successful producer, went down there to figure out how to make it musically happen. But, you know, I think what I always tell people, I think part of what was their undoing from a commercial radio perspective was the controversy. But the craziness of the Chicks was sort of what made them what they were and sort of what put them in that trick bag, if you will. But, man, I heard Wide Open Spaces the other day on Sirius XM. That was just one of the greatest records of all time. Like, it's really sad that we don't have more Chicks music on country radio. And it's coming back, and I hear more, and I know they continue to tour and continue to have a huge following. But
is that right? So they kind of blackballed, you mean? Is
it they got blackballed at radio.
Yeah.
At country radio.
Wow.
So they really focus on alternative radio and other sources and continue to tour. I think they were going to tour pre-COVID, and then everything.
They're just the
broke
Chicks now. Is that what
Dixie Chicks.
Yeah.
They changed their name, right?
Yeah, the Chicks now. Yeah, that was funny. There was even controversy when we signed them about their name back then. You know.
There was?
Yeah, there was. It was like, I remember, we weren't even thinking about the political correctness of it back then, but basically, like, it was the only way they made any money, because we weren't paying them any money to speak of. But they were touring as the Dixie Chicks in their little Texas area, and they're all like, we need to change the name. And I'm like, that's just the one thing you're not going to get to do, because that's the only way they're making money. So if they want to, they're like, don't change our name back then, you know. And then of course eventually they changed their name. But yeah, I got a lot. Unfortunately, I was a lawyer for a lot of these people, so I'm under a nose of confidentiality.
Of course,
so there's not too much I can say, but there were a lot of fun stories.
Good people, though. I mean, you know, you just assume all these big shots have these giant egos, but you've had good.
Well, I think I've been really blessed in my career. Like Tim McGraw is just one of the most fantastic human beings on the planet. Like, I feel like if my car wouldn't start, I could call him up and say, "Could you come start my car? And help me, give me a jump or something." He's just one of those good guys that would do that kind of thing. And I've dealt with a lot of really good people. Yeah, there's some that the phone rings and you cringe a little bit, but just a lot of really great people that I've been associated with. And I used to tell people when I was a lawyer, it's like, hey, if you don't want to take my advice, I just won't be your lawyer, because go get somebody else. I'm not going to just take the money just to do it. If we don't have a rapport, don't get along, or it doesn't work, then it's way better to move on and find somebody you do have a connection with.
You're also, I think this is basically true, even though it's a broad statement, dealing more in the country world. I never run, the few country artists I've dealt with, you never seem to run into the same sort of issues I run into with rock people.
Yeah.
But they're a different cat. I mean, it's the stories you hear, all the crazy stories, not all of them are true, but things like acts that I had an act that came in, and we did 2 summers of MTV shows, and we did them in the museum, and we had just great. It was the first Alicia Keys, their first time, and Pink. These were some of their first shows they ever did, and they were really nice people. But you'd run into a lot of them, like the guys that would say to you, a manager would introduce you to somebody, and the manager and the lead singer would say, "Never look me in the eyes again." Now people think that shit doesn't happen, but it does fucking happen. Okay, and it's like, they tend. There's something about country music that tends it to be always seems more civilized to me, more agreeable. The fan fest that they had here, which was something that would never happen in the rock world, where you get to meet these people and they do autographs. I mean, that's just unheard of. I mean, it's a whole different ballgame there.
Yeah, it really is. There's much more of a family atmosphere, and there's competition, but there's friendly competition.
Is that right?
We try to help each other where we can, and so I think it's a different scenario than some of the other genres, if you will. So no, generally it's a great people, great artists, and most, like I said, are really passionate about what they do and care about what they do. So.
Now I bet you you don't know where Dave Matthews' first concert was.
Wow, no, I
Virginia?
don't. Charlottesville. Am I
At the
getting
Deke
close?
At the Deke House.
No,
yeah.
Deke House.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now there's a controversy right there. He's been eligible. It's 25 years.
Yeah.
And he was on the ballot last year.
Mm.
And they do a public voting. Now, rightly or wrongly, the public voting is one vote. Whoever wins, it's one vote. So basically, you've got about 600 people that vote. I still vote, but it creates a lot of furor about that artist that wins. And everybody's, well, he won last year. He won that vote, didn't get in. So this year he's not on the ballot. And people don't understand that they start over every year. Just because you were on the ballot and you didn't get in, doesn't mean you get carried over into the ballot the next year. They start.
That's the same
It's
way.
the same process. You got to sit there.
Yeah.
But that causes, and there aren't, as I say, there aren't many acts in the rock world that have started in the last 25 years or so that I think are slam dunks. And he was one, I would think, in terms of success, influence, everything should have been happened like immediately. But it just doesn't work that way. I mean, it's so seldom you get one of these artists that just gets done. The eligibility's done. They get nominated. They get in. So.
It's true for the Baseball Hall of Fame too. As a baseball fan, sometimes I get frustrated by guys who aren't in. But eventually they'll probably get in. Like you said, guys who deserve it eventually are going to get in for the most part.
Yeah.
Right? Very few.
I used to write. People would write. I learned when I was at Marvel that kids wrote me a lot. Not kids, but everybody wrote me lots of letters, complaining. I mean, I was talking about this the other day. I had 4 death threats that I had to clear the Marvel building in New York because we did something in the comic book to some character that somebody didn't like. And the worst one was we killed off Magneto, which is a very famous villain. And I got this death threat. And you can't believe that the passion these people have for these characters. In fact, I wrote a woman, which was unusual in those days, about her concern about, she'd heard Magneto was going to die. And I said, let me tell you 2 things. Let me remind you that nobody is ever really dead in the Marvel universe except for 2 people. And I was wrong about one of them. One of them that'll always be dead is Spider-Man's uncle, which is the reason Spider-Man is Spider-Man. He's the angst he got from he could have saved his uncle, but he didn't do what he did. The other one was Bucky, who was Captain America's sidekick, and Bucky died in the 40s, and I said he's never coming back, except he did. He's called the Winter Soldier now. So, I mean,
never say never.
Yeah.
Right. There's one other Deke house that's associated with music in the mid '60s, and that's the Mississippi Deke House. And they used to have all the doo-wop acts there. And I don't know, the guy by the name of Howlin' Moon or something like that.
Howling Wolf?
Howling Wolf, yeah. Used to play at the Deke House.
That's the funniest thing you ever said. Howling Wolf.
Howl at the moon.
Well, there's a guy who wrote a book just recently, and I never asked him if he was.
It's Bill Morris.
Yeah.
He's a Deke.
Yeah, he is a Deke.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and he wrote that book about his relationship
That's
with
right.
the Moonglows.
That's
yeah.
right.
Well, and that's also how Malco or Maleko, however you want to say it, Malco. That's how they basically started. Was these guys that were booking acts in fraternity houses, and they decided, start a record company. What a stupid idea that was. It worked.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Surprise.
So, yeah, that was a hotbed in that.
Yeah.
They kept those. Well, the whole fraternity system in the South kept these acts between the fraternities and beach music.
Yeah,
I mean, there were acts that managed to stay alive decades and decades after they had any reason to still be around. And
so you knew about Bill Morris then?
I know Bill.
That's a pretty well known book or thing.
It's sort of a personal kind of thing,
Yeah.
remembrance thing, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And but he also, the guy that he knew that was a Moonglow was somebody he brought to Cleveland, and we were happy to bring him up there. I was very close to Harvey Fuqua, who was the lead singer and one of the founders of the Moonglows, and he also then went on to be a major force at Motown. And so he would come back and do things with his version of the Moonglows all the time. And so we brought Prentice Barnes, I think was the guy, brought him up there. And Bill was very good about taking care of him, did a lot. But he like me, revered vocal groups and all these older acts, and he would do anything to be part of those sort of things.
Huh, okay.
Yeah, but that's right. That part of the world did have a sort of centric, sort of a critical mass of those acts coming through there.
All right.
Yeah, and it was, again, all the stuff out of the beach music, whether it was the Occasions, whether it was the Tams, all these bands that were in the soul era. Also, it went from doo-wop 50s into the soul era, and they lived, remarkably. And this is, I don't know. I always wondered what they paid these bands. Not much, I'm sure, back even then, but there was a lot. It would be a lot of people in those bands. There's a lot of moving parts in there, so it wasn't a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
One of the great stories that didn't happen at Deke is at Cornell, and I don't know how it happened. One of the rarest albums in rock and roll is that there's a live album recorded at, I can't remember which house it was, of Bo Diddley. And it's amazing it happened because the Chess brothers who ran Chess, which is where Bo Diddley was, they're the kind of guys surprisingly kill somebody. I always thought somebody must have been in the industry, because to pull that off, to have the equipment in a fraternity house to make it happen. This is in probably 58 or 59 to pull that off, and it's got its own designed cover with artwork and everything. It's a pretty well done bootleg. It's not very good sound wise, but it's just one of those crazy things that happens.
I'll have to add, 'cause I know some people who know Cornell history, so
You have to see if you find out if they know if it was some son of some guy that was in the business and he decided he'd do it for his kid or something like that.
All right.